Okay, this is the first of the series. At the moment, there's going to be 4. This is Lightroom Essentials. Today, we're going to be covering what Lightroom's all about, really understanding the catalog, importing your images, and the basic grid edit. So pretty essential foundational Lightroom stuff. And some of you in here, if you've just wanted to attend all of them, may already know this stuff. But we're going to keep it pretty focused so that we don't... I don't overload people. That's kind of the idea of these ones, is they can be bite-sized chunks. And if we have to go a few minutes over, if people have questions, all that's okay. But I just wanted to keep it rolling smooth and keep them simple. So we're going to cover all that. And honestly, I mean, things like the catalog, understanding those on a base level and really knowing what you can do with it, I think is really powerful. Sometimes it's surprising how little, I guess I should say, experienced Lightroom users know about what you can do with the catalog, you know, what the limitations are, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's going to be really useful. Dennis, if you're there, I'm going to unmute you, if that's all right. I'm going to give you just a second, just in case, like, I don't know, you're like yelling at the dog or something. But I just want to make sure the audio is coming through okay, so we don't have any interruptions when we're really rolling. For those of you that have just popped in, the link I put in the window here for seimeffects.com, seimeffects.com/chat. So open up that window in your web browser as well. That's the open chat room where everybody can just jump in. Dennis, I'm going to unmute you now. And just make sure that you're working okay. Are you there, Dennis?
Stop barking. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, excellent. Good to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Dog.
And the fact that I stopped barking, yes. I thought you were talking to me. I'm like, what? Is it clipping?
No, you said yelling at the dog.
Okay.
So,
yes, I did.
Yes, I'm here.
Sorry, this is the mode where I'm like kind of clammy, trying to make sure everything comes together, hoping that my service provider doesn't crash, all that kind of stuff. I don't want to turn this into a podcast, so I'll let you go. But Dennis, if you have anything to say along here, just raise your hand. And if anything's going on in the chat room or something like that, you know where to find me.
Will do.
All
Sounds
right.
good.
Cool. And I see Ken Whitmire here, and too, I'm going to shout out to you, Ken. Ken Whitmire is the wall portrait master. He actually has his wall portrait conference coming up in a couple weeks here, wallportrait.com. And you guys, if you listen to the podcast, you've heard me talk about this lots of times, what I do with the wall portraits and stuff, and that's where it all started. And Ken's really cool. He's trying to master Lightroom even more and implement it more in his business. And so he's joining us today. So thanks for being on here, Ken. It's our honor. And check out the Wall Portrait Conference if you really want to change your business forever. Okay, so let's get started. We are already a few minutes over, and let's get going, starting with what Lightroom is all about. So first of all, I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat room. If anybody has any quick questions in the chat room, just general things that you might want to cover, go ahead and type those in there. If you have a real specific question for me, use the questions box or raise your hand in the window. Okay, let's get started. Let me just hide this, and everybody should be seeing the screen. Should be good to go there. Let me jump into Lightroom here. So let's just give a quick overview. We don't have a ton of time today, but we also don't have a ton of topics. So Lightroom is a management tool. It's a start to finish tool that is about saving time, it's about managing images, and for me, it's about sales, about pretty much everything in between. And sometimes people will say, well, why Lightroom? And Lightroom is a start-to-finish management tool for me. There's other resources, there's things like Aperture and stuff like that, and I'm certainly not saying those are bad applications, but in my experience, Lightroom is an extremely powerful tool, and it just makes me more efficient. What I say to people is that Lightroom does 90% of what Photoshop does, but it does 5 times faster. And the interesting thing about Lightroom, and one of the reasons it's so cool, is I don't know, for those of you who know Photoshop and have spent years learning Photoshop, you know how hard it was. And Lightroom has a lot of nuances, a lot of intricacies, but the basics and the essentials of it are so much more simple and easy to manage and every day. And for me, that's huge. And I think for people that are new to Lightroom and trying to find a way to get things in order so they can actually have some of their life back, it's a really powerful thing. Yes, Bob, I am talking. So is everybody else hearing me okay? Please type that in the chat. Bob apparently is not getting audio. Sounds like you may need to adjust some audio settings, Bob. Okay, sounds good, Dennis. Let me know, anybody else, if you're having issues. It could be that Well, the internet's not perfect, but I'm going to move on, and I will be keeping an eye on the chat. Sounds good, Daniel. Okay, so I guess in essence, and let's just kind of go over real quick, and we're going to cover more of this stuff in more detail on other webinars and on the different topics that we're going to cover in the different webinars. I'm just using the F key now to cycle the screen size. I guess I'll just leave it here for now. That way I can see my my interface window for the webinar. But essentially what we have here is we have the library, develop, slideshow, print, and web. Now we're going to be focusing mainly on develop today because that is kind of the foundational basics. I think that a lot of times people jump too quickly into develop in their workflow or the other modules. And for me, the key to workflow is a plan. You know, you do one step at a time. You start with this step, and you sort images, and then you edit images, and then you do more refined editing, and then whatever project it is you're working on, you have a plan, you have a flow to your workflow, and hence workflow. I think the name is pretty self-explanatory. It's about having a flow and a consistency. Now, one more thing that I did not put in here, and I will put that in the chat right now, is if you go to simeffects.com/LR for Lightroom, that's the resource page for the workshop. And check that out, and you'll have the notes for this workshop, including my favorite shortcuts, just my general Lightroom notes, link to the chat room. There's some other links and good stuff and freebies and all that good stuff there too. So go to that one to download your resources for the workshop. Now, I'm just going to be switching back and forth here as I go along to make sure the chat room is looking okay and everything is in order. In terms of where to start, it's the import really is where we should start. So I guess I had it reversed on the list. But let's start with the catalog and then with the import. So the Lightroom catalog, think of the Lightroom catalog as a file cabinet is how I try and explain it. It's commonly the most confusing thing for people. A Lightroom catalog is a storage place for the changes you've made to your images. So let's say you have 100 images and you import them into Lightroom. Lightroom has a default catalog, or it makes a new catalog, and you import 100 images, and you tell it on import where the images are at. If you want them moved, if you want them to stay where they're at, and we're going to come to that. Don't fret, because we're going to come to the details on that. But Lightroom references the images from wherever you tell it to. It imports them into its catalog, and then you make changes to those images and do whatever you want with them, and Lightroom records that. So this is an image that's done, but I'll just throw it up here as an example. It's from my spring trip down on Pismo Beach. If I click here and click exposure, and I increase the exposure on this by 1 stop, which it doesn't need. But if I were to go and show this file in the Finder, and I'm not going to try and open it because it's a 400 meg file, but what you would see is the original file. When you make a change in Lightroom, you're not changing the file. You're only changing in Lightroom. So think of Lightroom, imagine if you had a negative. Imagine if we were back in the film days and you had a negative and you took a photo and that photo was filed in your negatives storage. And then you had a number on that negative, and let's say it was IMG 0012. And that was your negative number. And then you had a note card box, and all these note cards were in numerical order, and you could look up IMG 0012, and that was the notes for that negative. That told you exactly what you did when you printed that negative to get the desired result. So the note card box is the Lightroom catalog. The Lightroom catalog, and don't take it too literally. I'm trying to make an analogous comparison to something analog, just to kind of make it clear. But the Lightroom catalog is that box of notes. Lightroom keeps track of all the changes you've made to those photos. The original files have not changed at all. None of those changes are committed until you export, i.e. you export as a new JPEG, or you open the image in Photoshop. Now it becomes an exported image, and it saves a new copy. Your original photo is not changed in Lightroom. So I think I'm clear on that. I just always want to make sure we've covered that, because sometimes it really confuses people. So the Lightroom catalog is really adaptable, and it can be used in a lot of different ways. If we take and go to File in Lightroom, and let's just make a new catalog for purposes of this discussion. And I'm just going to put it on my desktop, and let's call this Gavin's Cool Catalog. No, wait, I got a better idea. Let's call it Ansel Adams Catalog. Because I think if Ansel Adams was here, he would use Lightroom. It's like the dark room. Okay, so I'm going to make a new catalog. It's going to close this catalog and open a new catalog. So let's just get that out right here. One catalog is open at a time. It's like one drawer being open on your file cabinet at a time. Okay, so what I have here is a completely empty blank catalog. Let me resize this window a little bit because it's a little bit oversized. Oop. There we go. Okay, so there's no photo because there's no photos in here. What we have is an empty note card cabinet. Okay, I'm going to hide this with Command H. And I'm going to go here. And here is the Ansel Adams catalog. Now what we have, if we look close, let me zoom in on this a little bit. Here's what I just made, right here. AnselAdams.lr catalog. I'm an Ansel Adams fan, by the way. So this right here, and let's look at the size of this. Command I, it's only 864 kilobytes, okay? Now what we see here, these are temp files that are made when the catalog is open. This is a previews file. So when you have a raw file and you view it in Bridge or in Lightroom or anything like that, it renders previews. The previews file is the data for the previews, which we don't have any yet because we haven't put any images in here. But this catalog is its own file, stored wherever you name it. People get really confused a lot. I've seen this countless times where they don't know what's going on with their Lightroom and where their photos are, because when you buy Lightroom and install it, it makes a default catalog. It's a huge mistake not to know where everything's going, especially if you're doing paid work. I mean, imagine, what happens if you lose everything on your current computer right now? And we won't get into the backup discussion, but you want to know where things are at, where your original files are at, where your catalog's at, so you can properly manage and back up and do all that good stuff. Oops, let me get rid of some of this extra clutter here. Okay, so let's import some photos into this catalog, and I'm totally going to be taking questions, and we'll look at more stuff if you guys are confused. But let's go, and I'm going to insert a memory card. I have one all ready to go here. Nothing fancy on it, but I just put a memory card into my card reader. And I'm going to go up here to File. It actually recognized it automatically. If it didn't recognize it, you would go to File and Import Photos. And here are all the photos on this card. Okay, so let's go down here. I'm going to uncheck all. And I'm just going to select a couple of these photos. And then I'm going to click Import. Now we're going to come back, because I want to keep things in order. We're going to come back to how to best manage the import dialog box. But suffice it to say, I've imported these 3 photos right now. And let me fix this one, because its orientation is off. Whoopsies. So I'm going to click right down here on this cell and rotate it. Okay, so nothing special here. What do we have? I have a photo of a piece of Elvia from my vacation that is now being scanned. I have Ken Whitmire from when we were skiing last year. This is from my point and shoot, and there's my son and my wife and my little girl. Okay, so let's hide this for a minute and go back to where we were. Here's that folder again. There's the Ansel Adams catalog. Now if we look at the catalog, it's only gone up by 3 kilobytes. So I'm just reinforcing we haven't imported photos into the catalog itself. You'll notice it's made some previews. We have a 1.5 megabyte preview file because it's rendered the previews for those images. Everything in the catalog is referenced to wherever I told it to import these images, which in this case, I'm going to right click, go show in Finder. In this case, it put them in the pictures folder, which I would never actually import photos to there if I was actually working, but I just left it on whatever the default is. So I'm going to hit delete. I'm going to delete these from disk. Real quick side note here, and we'll probably come to this later, but when you go to delete a photo from Lightroom, it says delete the photos and either remove them from the catalog or delete from disk. And the reason it's asking you that is because again, the catalog is just referencing the photos. If I just clicked remove, it would just take them out of the catalog, but the photos would still exist on the disk. In this case, if I hit delete from disk, it's actually going to erase those from my hard drive. They're gone. Check the chat room here real quick. And everything looks good. Okay, so now we have an empty catalog again. In the chat room, because I don't want to get too redundant, it's just this is something that people often get hung up on. Does everybody understand the catalog? And does anybody have any questions on the catalog? Feel free to raise your hand. We'll put you on the audio, or ask a question in there, or type in the chat room. Just let me know, are we good on the catalog? Is it making sense? Think of the catalog as a module, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about what you can do with it in just a couple minutes here as we start importing some more photos. Everybody good? I'm not seeing any questions coming up. I'm going to presume that everything is working correctly. Okay. Let's import some more photos. So I'm going to go File. This time I'm going to do it manually. Import photos. Let's look at what we got here. So here's the import dialog box in Lightroom 3. It's similar in Lightroom 2. It's a little bit different, but we're going to focus on what's here since most of us are using Lightroom 3. On the left hand, we have the source. And when we say we want to import photos, Lightroom's asking, where do you want them to come from? Now, if we had inserted a memory card, that would show up in this list too. And if you insert a memory card and the computer's set to auto-detect it, it will actually pop up and it'll automatically have the photos in that memory card selected. Okay, but in this case, I'm just going to go to my pending to drive and go to, and you see the folders. This is a physical hard drive, just to be clear. I'm going to go to my projects and test catalog and images, and let me just select some kind of a folder here. I'll take this folder. And I'm not going to select all of them, but I'm just going to take a few images. To bring into the catalog. Okay. So I've selected whatever photos I want to come in. I can check all or uncheck down here. And of course, as always, you can select multiples by command clicking. Or that would be Control on the PC. You can also click one down here, Shift, and click another one, and it'll select everything in between. Those are standard computer shortcuts. Now, down at the bottom here, it says we have 10 photos. 2 gigabytes is what we have selected. Must be large files. We're sorting by capture time. You can control thumbnail size down here. And you can also define all these settings and then save a preset. So you could say, okay, this is the folder I'm importing from. This is the settings I'm going to use while importing. And then you can save all those settings as a preset so you can come back to it later really easily. Okay, so at this point, make a little room here. At this point, we have the right side. So the left side is where we're starting from. That's where the images are coming from. The middle is the images that we're using. Now, we see up here, we have the options. Copy as DNG would copy in like a raw file, for example, and make it as a DNG. I won't go into that too deep. We could talk about DNG later for people that want to talk about it. It's a standardized raw format. Copy means you're going to take whatever images I select and make a copy of them to wherever I tell it to put them. Move would take the images from their physical location on the hard drive or the memory card and move them over. And add would leave the images exactly where they were and add them to the catalog, and Lightroom will be referencing them from wherever they are. So let's say you already have a bunch of photos on your hard drive you were importing. You would use add, and that would bring those photos in to the Lightroom catalog. Okay, in this case, I'm going to do copy. And then over on the right side, that way I can show you this. On the right side, we have the destination dialog box. And let me just zoom in. It's going to Gavin Mac Pro is where it's defined now. But let's actually go and put it this way, because I have something to show you about the catalogs. I'm going to go to the Ansel Adams catalog we make, right on the desktop. So here I am, Gavin Mac Pro, desktop, Ansel Adams catalog. That's that folder we keep coming back to. And I'm going to say organize into one folder, but I'm going to put it into a subfolder and call it images. In general, I'll keep my photos like in my shoots catalog. I'll keep the photos in basically have 1 year, and that'll be all the photos for that year. Now, for my individual jobs, and we're going to come to that in a few minutes, I have a separate catalog for each job, for each wedding, for each portrait section. It really makes my life easier, and we'll come to that. Okay, so I'm importing it into the same folder that the catalog is in, inside a folder called images. And there's some options up here. You can render standard previews. One-to-ones take longer. Generally, you'll leave it on standard. You can always render previews later. Don't import duplicates. And that allows Lightroom to detect if there's duplicates. If let's say you've already imported from a card and you're importing the rest, that's a good one to leave selected. We don't need it selected in this case. Make a second copy too if you wanted to back up. I don't need to do that because I have other backup systems in place. You can there's parameters to rename the files. We can apply presets. So these are developed presets. Those of you that, if you found me, you probably know that I make presets for Lightroom, Power Workflow, and all that kind of stuff. So what you could do is actually select a developed preset. A lot of times if I'm importing, I'd take something like the Super Gentle preset and apply that to all the images on import, so I had a general basic correction to thing. Some people that use Power Workflow use something like Superhero for a fully automatic correction, whatever you want. But bottom line is you can apply a preset here, and you can also add keywords and things like that. So there's quite a bit you can do on this right-hand panel over here. We're still in the import dialog box. At this point, I think we've pretty much covered the essentials. I'm just checking for questions here, and I think everything's good. If you guys have not joined the chat room, it's seimeffects.com/chat, so get in on that. Okay, so we're done with that. The images are selected. Let's click Import, and it says Import in Progress. It's bringing these photos in. Wait for it. This is why I didn't select hundreds of photos. Okay, so this is what you would see when you normally import. It's bringing the photos in. It's rendering previews for them. And while we're waiting for it to do that, does anybody have any questions? Dennis, I'm going to unmute you real quick, and if anybody has any questions, raise your hand. Are you there, Dennis?
I am.
Hey, I know you're already a Lightroom user, but in absence of people raising their hands, are we good to go? Is this all making sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so far so good.
Okay.
I've got a lot out of it already, which is scary because every time you talk about this stuff, I still get a lot out of it.
So do I. That's scary too, huh? Okay. All right, sounds good, Dennis. I just want to make sure that you're kind of my check-in to make sure everything's still working. So.
Yep.
I have to admit, it's a little surreal because I'm used to a crowd and I'm sitting in here in this studio all by myself and talking to nothing and hoping that everybody's getting it. So, all right, cool.
Well,
Thanks, Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think our photos are imported. Looks like, Bob, you got your sound working. That's great. There's the 4x5 Linhof. Now, you see what's happening here. It had to wait because it's still rendering the previews. If we look up here, it's showing still rendering previews. This is something to keep in mind. I mean, if you import a wedding, it is going to take a while to render previews. A lot of times I'll build the catalog when I get home from a wedding, or actually usually during a wedding, but then I'll start rendering one-to-one previews, those full-size previews, overnight because it really can take a long time to render the really high-res previews. If I were to click on this and zoom in, there's actually a delay here because it's processing all this other stuff. And it's pretty quick here. It's still actually rendering. It's not, I don't know how it's coming over the stream, but it's still rendering for the full quality. Let me zoom out there so I don't cost it any more processor power than is necessary. Okay. So let's go out here. I'm going to hide this for just a moment. Thanks, Daniel. Now let's look at this folder again. See what's changed here? We now have images in the Ansel Adams catalog folder. Okay, so this is the huge thing. If you put your photos in the same folder as your catalog, it's now a self-contained unit. That means it never loses these photos. If I take this file right here, this whole Ansel Adams catalog, and copy and paste it to a hard drive and move it to my laptop, I would open this same folder, open this catalog, and it would know exactly where everything was. Everything would be exactly the same. Now, let's say I had stored these images somewhere else. Let's say I had stored them on the desktop instead of in the catalog folder. If I had stored these somewhere else, and then I copied this folder over, and I would copy both. I would also, let's say I copied the Ansel Adams folder right here, and my images folder, but they were separate, and I put them on my laptop. Now, when I opened the catalog, the previews would still be there. The catalog wouldn't have lost anything, but it would say, hey, there's something missing. The images are missing. And it would show question marks next to all my images. And it wouldn't be the end of the world, but I would have to go and remap where the images went to and say, here's where they are, and it wouldn't re-import them. It just kind of reconnects with those images. If you keep your images contained in the same folder as your catalog, they always stay together. And this is how I do almost everything. I don't think I do it any other way. See, a lot of people get Lightroom, and they already have a bunch of photos, so they just dump everything into their catalog, and it's scary because a lot of times I see people, and I've done consultations and stuff with people where we were kind of getting their workflow in order, and we talked about, getting your images, knowing where your images are. Images are not to be scattered all over a computer. Maybe that's fine if you're taking snapshots, if you're willing to lose them, but especially if we're shooting, if we're serious and we're doing a lot of images, or if you're doing this professionally, I think it's really important that we know how to manage things and know where to find things when we need them. Okay, so here's our catalog. Here's our images. Now let's look here. Let me show the size of this. See, the catalog is only 2 megs now. Again, the photos are not in the catalog. I know I keep coming back to this. The catalog is one thing. Once you totally and fully understand the catalog, everything gets simpler. Because in Bridge, for example, you don't have a catalog. It makes previews. It saves sidecar files on the images, which, by the way, you can do from Lightroom if you need to. But by default, Lightroom stores everything in that catalog. Okay, so let's look here at how this is relevant. Here's my pending drive. It's an internal drive that I do my current jobs on. Okay? And I'm on the Mac Pro right now. Now here's a job. Here's a wedding I did the other day. This is Chris and Ashley's wedding. Now what's the size of this? This is 55 gigs. Okay, so inside this, I have their catalog. Inside the catalog is their catalog. There's images from the e-session, images from the wedding. But see this pattern here? This is all contained. When I export and post these for their online galleries or make a disc or whatever I'm going to do with this job, I have a pre-made folder that I've copied in that has all my categories. So that's where I'll export images from Lightroom to. I have an other stuff folder where I store their album. But this folder right here is all the images and the Lightroom catalog, all self-contained. But the bottom line is all of this is in one customer file. So it's almost old school, like you have a file cabinet and here's that customer and everything that pertains to them is in here. If I copy this folder, I can move it anywhere I want, I can archive it somewhere, and 2 years later I can come back to this and everything will be in place. The downside of having everything in one catalog is, let's say I were to have one huge catalog for everything. And Lightroom's designed to handle it pretty well, but there is a concern, of how when the catalog gets huge, does it slow things down? All my eggs are in one basket. Yes, I have backed up, but if that catalog fails, and I've seen it happen with people, I like that breaking up separate catalogs for that as well. Okay, but let's say I had this main hard drive, and I had wedding images, and then I had a folder like this with the images from Chris and Ashley's wedding. Okay, that's great. And let's say then that I had one Lightroom catalog for everything. So it would not be in this folder. It would be somewhere else. Here's what happens. I can edit these photos. I can work with them. Everything's cool. I select the photos from their folder and their wedding inside this master catalog. But a year from now, when I need to free up space, maybe I want to archive onto another drive. Now, in my case, I pretty much keep everything on this huge Drobo vault and then back that up. But at some point, maybe I need to archive, and most people do need to archive because hard drives do fill up, especially with cameras these days. If you were to copy their folder and it didn't have their catalog in it, you've now moved their images. Lightroom has lost them. So then you have two choices. If, let's say, you've archived them to a drive that's not connected to your computer. Maybe you have an external drive somewhere, and that's how you archive stuff. Now Lightroom shows Chris and Ashley as a question mark because those files are missing. All the information's still in there, but guess what? For the next however many years until you want to get rid of that information, which for me is never, you have this folder with a question mark in there that you have to look at every day. And if you remove that folder from Lightroom, now the edits are gone. If you physically take the images, the references for those images out of Lightroom, it throws away all the edits, all the settings, everything. So again, coming back to managing your jobs. Now, if you do photography and you're just an enthusiast, you have lots of different photos, but you want to keep them together, sure, just use one catalog. For example, I'm just opening this catalog here. This is my shoots catalog. And give it just a second, and you'll notice I have shortcuts. I've made shortcuts. Most people open Lightroom by clicking the Lightroom icon, which, by the way, will open the last catalog that you had open. And if you go up here, you can go to File, Open Recent, and open any catalog you want. I drag shortcuts down to my dock or my desktop or wherever, and I can just open whatever catalogs I'm currently working with. Okay. Now you see what we have here. Looks like this is stuff from my trip. But this is my shoots catalog, and it goes all the way back to 2007. This is not my paid customer jobs. This isn't commissioned work. This is me going out and doing landscapes. This is me doing experiments. So for this stuff, this is my stock photos. For this stuff, I have one big catalog, and it's getting pretty large. I have a personal category in here, and I have my projects, my more professional projects. And I sort them all by year, so I kind of keep it tidy so there actually is a folder structure on my hard drive. So what we're seeing here is up here is folders. That's referencing to the physical location, okay? So in this case, it works fine. Now, if you'll note, though, here, let's show this in Finder. I'm going to show this photo. Guess what? All of this, my shoots, all these years, everything, it's all in the Shoots main folder along with Shoots catalog. So even though I have one huge catalog, I'm still using that same principle of everything is all under the umbrella of one Big Daddy folder, and everything's imported into there. Guess what? I can copy this whole catalog to an external hard drive, which I did on the trip I just took, so I had it all with me and I could work on it, and it's probably huge, but I just took a big old external hard drive and had it with me. And I can back it up really easy. Everything's all self-contained in here. It never loses track of anything. It really works good. It really does, guys. So even if you're not doing a bunch of weddings and portraits, this is about a 300 gigabyte folder here. Even if you're not doing a bunch of separate jobs, the concept of the separate catalogs still work. Maybe you'll only have one catalog. Maybe you'll have two or three. But the concept of a modular catalog, think of your Lightroom catalog as a big folder that has all this stuff in it. It's a big filing cabinet with all those note cards, and keep it with all the images that pertain to it, because I always know where everything is, always. And because if I don't, I actually fret about it. I mean, if I was at home and I realized, hey, did I accidentally move that folder, I might actually drive back to the studio because I'm not sure I could sleep well knowing that it was displaced. And let's see here. No breaks 15. Let me check here. You're coming in a little late. I'm glad you found the chat, and I'm going to approve you. Sorry about that, but it's the way the system works, is set up, and you weren't there before. So you should be good now. You should have just gotten an email, no breaks, with your login or your original email, and you should be allowed to jump right in to the workshop. Okay. So the catalog's a module. You can make as many as you want. You can go right up here. You can save. You can make a file. Where's it at? Oops, I'm not in Lightroom, that's why. Gosh, even I get confused. Okay, new catalog. Or you can open a catalog. Open recent. Now, here's another cool thing. Let's say you've been working the old school method and you want to kind of modularize out and get things organized. Let's say you got a catalog and it has all your separate weddings and stuff, but now, you know, you do need to archive and you don't want to lose all the information, but you also don't want that question mark sitting in there forever. What you can do is you can actually open up a catalog, and if I wanted to, I could select all photographs. There's 14,000 photographs in this catalog right now, and I could Command A, select all. Now, I'm not going to do this because it would take forever, but I could export as a catalog. So I could export all these photos with all the tags, all the settings, all the collections as a catalog. i.e., let's say this folder was a wedding. I could export this folder as a separate catalog, and now I could archive it and not have to lose any of the information, take it out of my main catalog. So this is something that people do sometimes once I talk about this technique, is they'll go back, and it takes some time, but you can export these things into customer folders and stuff like that and try and get things more manageable so that you know where everything's at. Now, you can also, for the record, you can also import from a catalog. So let's say I'm at a wedding and I'm making a catalog kind of on the go so I can do a slideshow at the reception, and I get back to the studio, but I already have a catalog that has their engagement session in it that I started 3 months ago. Well, I can jump right in there and import the catalog that I made at the wedding along with all the settings and everything, and it'll pull everything out of that catalog into the current catalog I have open. So that's kind of a nice feature too. Check on the chat room here. Sounds good, no breaks. Glad you got it. Okay, I'm looking for raised hands. Just for those of you, if you got here a little bit late, you can raise your hand in the attendee list and make sure you're called in, have a mic set up, totally open. I mean, I want this to be like as much like a workshop in person as it can be. So if you can, if you have a question, raise your hand and I'll actually put you on the audio feed. You can also use the chat room. I'm watching that too, although there is an official questions panel if you really want to make sure I'm paying attention to it right in here. So we can use that as well. What is it we got? 542. Okay, we're doing good. All right. I'm just trying to make sure I haven't missed anything on the concepts of this catalog. Does everyone understand? Seriously, I mean, that's why we've broken these up into small bite-sized workshops, is so we can really make sure everybody understands this. So if you don't understand, let's get you on and let's talk about this. I totally welcome some questions. In fact, it's a little creepy in here just talking to nothing. So I would be happy to hear someone's voice. It's okay. I'm not getting claustrophobic. I'm in the studio all day. I just want to make sure everybody understands this. And if everybody's good with the catalog, we'll move on. I don't want to bore people to tears. I just want to make sure the catalog is a very often misunderstood thing. Once you get the head around your head around the catalog, most of the other stuff in Lightroom comes pretty smoothly. Okay, everybody seems to be good. We can come back to it if you have a question. We'll have a general question session. We're going to have a break here in probably 15 minutes and just take 5. Probably more for me than for you. And I think we've pretty much covered the catalog. We've covered importing images. We're actually ahead of schedule, which means we're going to be able to cover some little extra tidbits and details, and that's cool. Yeah, the organization, KB, I mean, that's the thing, and that's a huge thing. That's why we're starting this from the beginning. Organization is huge. I cannot tell you how often I come by people, and they don't even know. I'll go somewhere, and I'll say, and if I do a private consultation, you know, I'll sit down and I'll question people. I'll say, where's your photos? And they'll say, well, they're right here. And they'll point to Lightroom. And I'll say, no, where are your photos? And it's shocking sometimes how often people don't know where things are. It's not that it's incredibly complex. It's that you got to take the time to really understand what's going on. Now, just going right back here. Okay, so just to recap real quick where we've come from, we've worked with various catalogs, but essentially we made a new catalog, we imported those images, and we covered that there's different destinations. You can decide where the images are going. In this case, we made a folder inside the main folder where the catalog is stored. We put the images into there, we imported them in, and now we have to go to work on them. Now, one thing I'd like to mention, let me just pop a card in here real quick, and just to kind of reiterate, resize this window a little bit so you can see it better. Is to keep an eye on this. See, this is what would happen if you selected a card to import, and it's showing all the videos, all the images. By the way, cool thing in Lightroom 3 is that while it doesn't play videos, it does import videos, so you can manage and add them to collections and stuff, which was huge for me because the video thing was frustrating. I manage everything from Lightroom, and then I'd have a folder off somewhere that I had to go look in for videos. So that was really neat. So we see here's this memory card, no name, eject card after import is selected. That's our source. What I wanted to point out is make sure you know what's happening here, because this is where you're telling it where those photos are going. For example, if you were just adding in, which it's not letting me do from a memory card, but if you're just adding in, it's leaving them where they are. It's just referencing those photos. So I know I've covered it. I know I'm being redundant, but I want to make sure we understand. Make sure if you're copying them in, and then make sure you know what folder they're going in. Down here is your destination. Make sure you look that over. You can organize the folders into date-based folders if you want. I just put it into one folder. Lots of stuff you can do here, and totally worth taking some time and poking around this. There's little subtleties. We covered all the essentials of what's happening in the import dialog box, but just make sure you know where those photos are going. And also remember that they have to go, that if you put them in with the catalog, Sorry, I'm distracted by the chat room. If you put them in the folder in the same one as the catalog, it'll keep track of them better. Josie, I'm not sure. I would suggest closing the window. You're probably actually running this application down here to make the meeting function. It probably activated that when you started. So I don't know if you're having a network hang or what. I would suggest quitting the GoToMeeting and re-clicking your link. You can always get into the chat room if you're having issues, because the chat room doesn't require any special authorization. But try disconnecting and let us know how it goes. Okay, let's look at the grid edit. And I'm going to go back to here, open recent. I'm going to go back to my general test catalog that I started with, because that has all my examples in it. Make sure there's nobody here that is still waiting to get in. Looks like everybody's good. Okay, whoops, let me get rid of that card. All right. Oops, I'm a naughty boy. I pulled that card off the wrong way. Okay. Let's look at some examples. And just make sure I know what I'm working with here. Okay, let's talk a little bit about basic settings in terms of development. And if we... Okay, sorry guys. Joe... I would suggest restarting your computer. I mean, unless you've changed computers, it should be working fine. Are you trying to log in from two computers? I'm not sure why it's restricting you, but it sounds to me like you have, for some reason, it's not recognizing you. I would suggest either quitting the browser and starting clean, and it's just bookmark the chat window so you can come back to it, or going out and, if need be, restarting the computer, and make sure you're doing it from the same computer so that you know it's working, because that possibly could be an issue. I'm not sure exactly how it's working, but that could be an issue. And Barry, hey Barry, good to have you. Barry says that Chrome was given issues with the webinar. Safari was fine. I'm using Firefox, so apologies if it's given you any technical issues, but maybe Chrome is having some issues. I don't know if that's what you're using or not, Joe. Okay, I'm going to keep moving, but I will check back with you very shortly. Okay, so what we have here is a bunch of raw photos, and I've already imported them. We've covered the importing, so I'm not gonna re-import them because these are here. They're ready to go. So what would I do with these in terms of a workflow and in terms of efficiency once I got them in here? And that's the basic grid edit. So in this, we're not even really going to delve into the develop module in this workshop. This is the essentials, and it's remarkable actually how much you can do in a basic grid edit. What I would do is, first of all, while importing, I probably would have started with a general purpose preset. Since I didn't, I can go right up here to quick develop and do that now. Now, what do I have? I have 71 photos in here, and it looks like there are kind of a whole bunch of random things. Some of them are old and very poorly lit or whatever, but this way we have some variety to look at. I'm going to Command A to select all of these. Then I'm going to go up to here. And choose a preset. So these are all the presets, and these will show up in develop module as well, so we'll come to that another time. But these are presets, develop presets that are imported into Lightroom. So as I talked about, you can do these while you're importing. You can also do it from right here. I'm going to use the super gentle preset. It's a very subtle general purpose correction. It doesn't do auto everything. What it assumes is that your exposure is good, and it just kind of jazzes everything else up a little bit. Now, this collection of photos I have, here's a good example, because the exposure isn't good on all of them. And that'll give me something to work with. Now, if I did something like Superhero, it would do a fully automatic correction. So you can, depending on what presets you're using, you'll kind of learn to know what you're dealing with. But I'm going to start with this preset. The reason I start with a preset is because it's back to efficiency. If I put a general purpose correctional preset on things, and you can see here it's not doing a huge amount, but it is altering every single one of these images. If I put a general correction it will get me started off in the right direction. So if I got a wedding, I mean, I'll start with a general correction on all 1,000 images right on import, because a raw file, typically, even if it's lit well, a lot of times a digital raw file is pretty flat and a bit ugly. Now, I'm not saying it has to be, but especially on Canon, it seems like there is an issue there. It's a raw file. It needs to be worked with most of the time. If you apply a preset on import that you like for a general purpose, it gets you a starting point for everything. Ken Whitmire, yes, raise your hand. There should be, I don't think you can actually see my screen. Dennis, if you know this, would you shout it out in the chat room? By the way, if anybody's not in the chat room, open another tab in your browser and go to simeffects.com/chat. That link is right down in the notes that I've put here under the welcome message. And you can click that and open that in a new window. You should be able to raise your hand, and I'm probably seeing it a little bit differently because I'm in the administrator window. Dennis, what do you see there in terms of raising your hand? There's a way to raise your hand. Would you describe that real quick so people are clear on the logistics of that? I'll just watch for that in the chat room. I'm gonna keep moving here. We gotta try and keep everything moving, but we'll get this figured out and make sure everybody's clear. Okay, so where we are is we've got all these photos. I've done a very light, basic correction. Now let me just take a few of them and use an example if I did something a bit more intense. I'm just not gonna select all of them. I'm just gonna take these and I'm gonna do the superhero preset. And we're going to see that the changes it's doing, because it's a fully auto correction, it's going to be making a lot more drastic changes to exposures and things like that. Some of them it's doing great on, some of them it screws up a little more, because anytime you introduce something automatic, like auto exposure, auto black point, all that kind of stuff, it can be really good, but it's still a computer deciding where it should be. It can be a really good starting point, but personally, I like to start with something a little more subtle most of the time, increasingly because usually my exposures are pretty much where I want them to be these days. And a lot of times on exposure, you can have a perfect exposure, and if you use a fully automatic preset, it'll make your exposure worse because it guesses of where it thinks the exposure should be, which is often wrong. Okay, so I'm just going to undo that because I like where I'm at better here. Okay, so the basic grid edit, I've started with a preset. Let's imagine we're right here, we've just imported. Here's the huge thing. In the grid edit, you can quickly go through and select your images, sort your images, and get almost of all of your work done before you ever even go into the develop module. Now, what I'm going to do, and Ken Whitmire, up to the upper left on the list of attendee names, there should be a button to raise your hand. And actually, I can just unmute you too. As long as you have your mic active, I can unmute you, and you will be on the stream. But when you're ready, you can just click that little button to the left of the attendee list to raise your hand. Right there. Thanks, DZ. And I'm hoping Josie is getting things worked out. We'll have a break in a few minutes, and I'll try and make sure he's going. Okay. What you can do is select. So I'm introducing a little bit of a concept here in terms of how you're going to manage it. Let's say this was a wedding, and I would go through, and I would import, do a basic preset, then I would do the sort. Let's say I did 1,200 photos of this wedding. Now, if I was shooting the wedding in 4x5, there definitely wouldn't be 1,200 photos. But honestly, that's a pretty fair number. 1,500 photos. Shooting digital, I mean, you can crank out quite a bit. Now, I would go into this mode. There's two ways you can do it. One way would be to make the thumbnails larger. So you could go like this and just sort through. If that's big enough for you, you can just kind of go like this. And what I do is I'd start at the beginning of the wedding and just say, okay, 4 stars, 4 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, 3 stars, 3 stars, 3 stars, 4 stars. Oh, let's make that 5 stars. The way I rate, and you can kind of just see me going through here, the way I rate is 3, 4, and 5 stars. Anything below that is ignored. That doesn't mean I delete it, but in terms of my workflow, the stuff below that is stuff I don't need. So I'll go through and start rating, and I'll do this for a whole wedding. And you can see I'm doing this really fast. Now, another way that I'll often do it, and let me shrink these thumbnails because we're still in thumbnail view. This is still the grid view. All right, now there's shortcuts to all this in the resources pack, in the Gavin's Lightroom notes, in the on the resources page, there's a list of my favorite shortcuts and things like that for doing stuff like this. I'm shouting them out as I go along, but just keep that in mind. You can download that list for free as a workshop attendee and get that info. Now, a lot of times what I would do is go into the view mode. You can click it right down here. The loop view, E is the shortcut, or space. Spacebar will take me into a full screen view. So I'm still in the library mode. I still have all the features in the library mode and all that good stuff. But I can just browse through this way and rate these photos. So imagine going through, and you can honestly get really fast. It's a little slow because apparently it's got some previews and stuff that aren't rendered. But I would just be going through doing this, not worrying too much. I mean, I've applied a general purpose, very, very light duty preset. These days, my exposures would probably be a little more dead on than some of these are. But I would be going through and quickly browsing through these, giving them a rating 3, 4, or 5 stars. Okay, so 5 stars are the really good ones. Those are kind of feature album images. Good emotion, good moments, good portraits, all that kind of stuff. You know, here's a 5-star. Very nice. 4 stars is stuff that's good, but there's probably quite a bit of 4 stars. Usually from a wedding, I'll have like 105 stars, maybe even less. I'll try and keep it a little less than that a lot of times. Then I'll have maybe, 254 stars and 153 stars. 3 stars are images that they're good, and I don't want to throw them away, but they're not incredible. They're great album filler images. They're memories that a bride and groom are probably going to want, little extras here and there, but not something that's super, super critical. Dennis, I see your hands raised, Dennis. I'm unmuting you. Were you just testing the hand raise feature, Dennis, or did you have a question?
I was just testing it, and it looks like Josie is still having issues. So
okay,
I guess we'll figure that out at the break.
Yeah, we're gonna take a break here in just a couple minutes, and I'll try and help him out.
Okay.
Okay. So ideally, and I fall into the trap of getting sidetracked a lot. Let's say I was browsing through in this mode, and I'm still doing what I call the sort and the grid edit. It's all in the library mode. It's easy to say, oh, let's go into develop mode and play with this and see what we got. And I'll admit I do that because I'll say, oh, here's a great photo. How's this going to look when I'm done? And you might get excited about it. I might want to work with it more. The truly efficient way to do this, in my opinion, and what I found, and in the resources page, there's a link to my article called The Super Workflow that outlines my workflow step by step by step. And in my experience, if you stay focused and do one thing at a time, it may be a little more tedious, but it's really fast. And if you go through and you say, okay, I've imported the images and applied a preset. Now I'm going through and sorting them, either in this mode or in the grid mode, rating everything. And don't get sidetracked from that. You can be really, really quickly. Okay, so let's imagine, go back to Lightroom here. Let's imagine that we're done with the ratings. And then we're going to come in and do the grid edit. So we've sorted them. I would click here and I'd say, okay, only show me everything 3 stars and above. So here's the filters down here. Now we can add flags, all that kind of stuff. We can talk about that a little more later. But you can sort. So it's set to rating is greater than or equal to by clicking this. That's the default. And I can click one, I can uncheck it to just show all the photos. Or I could click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. So if I click 3 stars, it only shows me everything 3 stars and above, which effectively means all the rejects I'm not seeing. So this is where I would be if this was a wedding or a portrait session and I had sorted everything and done my basic workflow up to this point. Now this would be pretty fast. I'm covering this and kind of making it maybe sound a little more tedious than it is because I'm trying to make sure everybody understands, but this will be happening pretty quickly to get to this point. Okay, we're going to take, what time is it? It's about 6. We're going to take about 5-minute break, and I'm going to try and make sure Josie gets back on here so he can join us and make sure everything's in order. Everybody go to the chat room, seimeffects.com/chat, and the link is right there in the welcome screen. And join in on the chat and just talk a little bit and hang out and just give me a couple minutes, make sure some logistics and things are working. And we're going to come back and make sure everybody understands the grid edit. Awesome. Everybody, I'm going to pause this for just a minute. Go ahead and chat in the chat room, and I'm going to try and make sure Josie gets back online here. But hello. Hey. Great, really appreciate it. I'm sorry you're having issues. So what's happening then? You got logged out, and it's not letting you come back in? And you're on the same computer. Okay. Gosh, that's really weird. Let's see. So, and it's telling you to have your login with your email. So it's telling you you're already in. But like you're trying to cheat. There's another person trying to come in at the same game. Okay, that's really weird. Let me. What's the best way to have it? Do you have another email? Okay, let me just do that. I'll send you a brand new invite, and I'm going to call them later and find out why it's doing this. But for now, I just want to get you back in there. I hate to have you missing things. So, thank you. My mic is still hot. Just a second. I'm going to send you an invite. I need to turn off the mic so I don't drive everybody crazy as I deal with this. No breaks. I'm not sure if the mic is, the mic is still on, isn't it? All right. Ah, there it is. I think I found it. Click to mute. Got it. Now I should be off. Okay. Let me just, webinars. Okay, so, Joe, what's your last name? Okay, and give me that other email address. Okay, so, gotcha, okay. Joe Silhouette at Gmail. Okay, I just sent you a registration. Let me make sure it's approved. Okay, and it should be approved. I know, gosh, and you know what? If you missed a lot, we'll probably be doing another series like this. So I'll certainly welcome you to come back into the next one, maybe a little bit yet, but yeah. Did you get the email? Did it come in? You're not going to see my screen yet because I paused it all, but it should. But it looks like it logged you in. Okay, sounds good, Joe. Let me know in the chat room once I get started. I've got to use the register for my glass of water and I'll drive back in there and see what's going on. Do you know what caused it to jump off in the first place? Are you on that? Okay, all right. Well, I'll look at this later. I'm going to get back focused here, but as long as you're in, we're good. And we'll be covering kind of some recaps of things we talked about. So if you have questions, you can ask me. Sounds good. All right. Bye-bye. All right, everybody, welcome back. We're right here today with Lightroom Power Essentials. Wow, that sounded official. Okay, I'm showing the screen now. You should be, it says I'm on the air. There's a little green light. Ba-doop, ba-doop. I'm on the air. And now, in a world where Lightroom rules supreme. The mic's on, isn't it? Okay. Make sure everyone's hearing. According to my end, it is showing I have audio coming through. And you should see the screen now, which is the chat room from my end. Did Josie get back in here? It looks... I'm looking for him. Are you in, Joe? I just want to make sure you got working. Yes, the pyro. Yeah, I actually helped on a pyro show last year. It was pretty cool. I might get my license one of these days. Not that I need any other projects. Excellent, Joe. Okay. Before we continue, does anybody have any questions? I'll be happy to put anybody on the audio feed that wants to get in there. Probably at the end, what we'll do is we'll open it up once we cover everything. Have your mics ready. So I'll probably unmute everyone, so that we can all just talk in an open forum. So if you, and you can certainly mute it from your end, but I'll unmute people so anybody that's on mic can discuss. All right, don't see any questions coming through. And Ken, did you have a question for the audio feed? You didn't actually raise your hand, but we can totally put you on if you have something you want to touch, because you always have good questions. Excellent, DZ. Okay, well, Ken, if you have a question, just raise your hand or shout out in the chat, and I will chat, and I will unmute you. So I'm going to pop back into Lightroom. Just a quick recap. We talked about the essentials of the catalog, managing the catalog in modular form, and also what the catalog does. Then we talked about importing images, where they're going, things you can do on import. Now we're to the grid where we're dealing with these images. So we had a group of images. We just went through virtually. I didn't do it to all of them, but we just sorted them 3, 4, and 5 stars, 5 being the best. And everybody doesn't have to use the same system. Find a system that works for you. But for me, I don't feel the need to have any more than 3. I don't need to rate a 1-star image as a rule, because I'm not going to be using it anyhow. So why waste the time? Why waste the time rating the image? So where we're at now is this grid edit. We've done our sort. We're down here. We're viewing 3 stars and higher. This is going to be our filter on all these general purpose examples. And what we're going to do now is what I call the grid edit. And this can save you so much time in not tweaking individually with images. Again, Lightroom is a management tool, but it's a workflow tool. It's a system. And once you get a system down, and everybody doesn't have to use the system in exactly the same way, but once you get the system down, it will save you tons of time. If I buckle down, I can edit a wedding in about 3 hours. Now, I say if I buckle down because oftentimes, because I'm not doing really high volume and I'm not on a super tight schedule, I'll kind of piddle with it here and there and get it done. But if I actually sat down with a stopwatch, and I've done this before, and calculated each time I was actually working, not on Facebook, but each time I was actually working with the images, I did a whole wedding, including some Photoshop edits on the basic ones. On some of the favorites, some Photoshop edits, taking them in to do some more extended work than I could do in Lightroom. I did a whole wedding in about 3 hours. Now, that didn't include my album design, but with InDesign, you can do that really fast too, and that's a workshop for another day. But the bottom line is, you can really speed up your workflow. I see people all the time who are spending a ton of time on editing, and they're not getting a system. And it's costing them a lot of time and a lot of stress because they don't have a system. Take the time to make a system. And I'm nerdy that way. I'll go in and I might have spent 20 minutes messing with a folder structure to decide what folder structure works the best for me, or whatever it might be. But get your system down. Okay, so let's continue and look at the grid edit. The way the grid edit actually works, in essence, is you go through and you glance at these thumbnails to get an idea of where you're at. So, for example, I might say this is a little dark, 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 and this is a little dark. And basically just select everything on the screen right now that seems a little dark. Boom, 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 just like that. And then I'll go up to here, and these are your quick develop controls. in the quick develop mode. You only see this, you don't see this in the develop mode, because in develop you'd have this whole panel right here would be the develop panel. Quick develop gives you some quick essentials like exposure, highlight recovery, fill light, contrast, all that good stuff. Okay, so what you can do is I've selected a bunch that are a little bit dark. I've commanded or control select what I see on my screen, and now I'm just going to go boom, boom, and I'm going to update it to 2/3 of a stop brighter. And you'll see these change, and it'll make them brighter. Okay, now I may deselect, Command D or Control D. And I'll say, wow, this one is too bright, and this one is too bright. So I'm going to go down 2/3. Just to be clear, the double little arrow here is a full stop, and the little arrows here are 1/3 of a stop. Decrease exposure, and again, if you mouse over, you'll see those differences. Another quick tip, if you hold down the Alt or Option key, it gives you a couple little bonus options. Whereas here is clarity and vibrance, here is sharpening and saturation. Throughout Lightroom, holding down that key, you'll see it switching things down here too. It's showing numbers on the keywords. Throughout Lightroom, just poke around and hold down that Option key, because you'll see things change on your screen. It's a modifier that gives you little cool little features here and there, and that's a good little tip to remember. Okay. Just checking the chat room. Excuse my back and forthness. Okay, so I'm going to bump this down a little bit more. Let's make these thumbnails a little bigger. I want to make sure you guys can see them, because I'm looking at these on a big screen, so I want to make sure this is clear. So what I would do in this grid edit is quickly go through, maybe I would say, hey, these need a little more contrast. I'm going to bump up the contrast a little bit. My primary focus here, honestly, just with exposure, and you can get most things really close. Because my goal here is not that I don't spend any more time on them. And I've already applied a preset to these. I already applied a general purpose correction. So usually what's out is probably exposure. And that doesn't mean you can't do the same thing with black levels. Let's add a little more black to this. Now I'm going to deselect, and I'm going to add a little more black to just this one. Then I'm going to take this one. I'm going to drop the exposure on that one. I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to increase the exposure. Even if you're doing them one at a time, I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit on these ones, but I'm going to drop it on this one along with dropping the contrast. You see how quickly I'm going through these. But I'm going to bring up the vibrance and the clarity on this one. On this one here, I'm going to bring up the black level and drop the exposure. I'm going to continue going down this list. I know I'm going fast now because I'm trying to illustrate. I'm going to bump up the contrast on this one. I'm going to leave the exposure alone on that one, but I'm going to drop it 1/3 of a stop on this one. Then I'm going to select this one here and this one here and this one here because they all look dark to me. I'm going to bump them up instantly 1 stop. I'm going to go to these ones. I'm going to bump those up contrast 2 points. That's 2/3 of a stop. I'm going to continue down this list. This one's a little dark and this one's a little dark and these two are dark. Let's bump those up 2/3. But this one's even darker. I'm going to deselect and bump it up 2/3 more. You get the idea. And I know you didn't get all that, but in terms of the speed I was going. But that's what I do when I'm actually in crank it out mode and get it done. You can go through and you can edit this really, really quickly. This image still needs more work. I mean, I had it way underexposed. I'm compensating. I've now blown out my sky. And that's actually an image I use for an example when we get to the workshop that deals with managing light and dynamic range. But the point is, we have all this stuff, and you can go through, and depending on how close you were to start with, I mean, let's look at this. This is way too much. Let's drop our contrast, our black levels, and our exposure on this one. And just bring it way down. Okay, still too much contrast, but you get the idea. And I have an example. Some of these are really badly exposed. Some of them are flat light. I mean, some of these in here need a lot of work. But it gives you an idea of what you would deal with. Now, if you did a wedding and everything's pretty consistent, you're not even doing this much. You're literally going through and you're saying, okay, these 5 seem a little dark. And you can get so fast at this. And what happens is you go through, you've already sorted, so you're down to, let's say in my case with a wedding, I'm already down to like 400 photos, maybe less. So I'm not doing this to every photo that I don't need, because the sort came first. That's the logical step in the workflow, is to sort before you start editing images. So I will go through, do all this editing, and you could import all the photos and render the previews. Let's say you did that before you went to bed. Come back the next day, and you jump right in. You could hop in there and go to work. And you could have 1,500 photos sorted and do your grid edit. Honestly, you could probably do it in an hour. I mean, if you really get in the mode and go for it and get in the zone, it can be so fast. Now, of course, you can also do things like white balance. So I could say, anything you can set in quick develop, you can do in this grid edit. So I could set the white balance to auto on this. Depends on your preferences. A lot of times I'll do white balance in batches in the develop when we get to the develop stuff. Okay. So that's the essentials of the grid edit. Let me just check the chat room here. And no breaks. Oh, a keyboard custom for Lightroom. That's cool. Main keys to use on. That's actually pretty neat. And you could also do that with an X keys or something like that. You can define you could use the shortcuts for it. There's also a plugin for Lightroom, and it's in the Gavin's Lightroom notes in there. There's a plugin that allows you to customize all your shortcuts in Lightroom. That's kind of cool. And lots of different ways you can do this. Quick note on shortcuts. I mean, yes, when I'm in this mode here, I'm using a mouse, and I can work really quickly, and then I can bounce right back up here and change settings in the grid edit, which is still where we're at. But remember those shortcuts. I mean, you'll see me bouncing around where I'm hitting this key, and then I'm going back to this, and then I'm changing the screen mode. And you can do all this stuff so fast, and I know, and I hear this all the time, oh, I can't remember shortcuts. Remember shortcuts. It's like, you know, you can force yourself to remember some. I don't care if you have to, you know, tattoo it on your forehead. Well, that might be a little extreme, because then people are going to say, what's that tattoo for? But honestly, I mean, maybe you need to write down the favorite shortcuts and put them on a Post-it note right in front of you on your computer, or do whatever you have to do, because those shortcuts in the long term, and I'm not talking about every shortcut, because there's hundreds of shortcuts in Lightroom. I'm talking about shortcuts for switching modules, library, develop, slideshow, that kind of thing. Shortcuts for changing the screen mode, shortcuts for just the essential things that we use. And sometimes I'll be working away and I'll realize I'm using shortcuts and I'm not even thinking about it, and it'll occur to me how much time I'm saving. Same with Photoshop, because I'm using these shortcuts. Same with everything on the computer, copying, pasting, moving text around. No matter what I'm doing, shortcuts save time. A lot of it. And if you use a computer every day, you absolutely need to know those shortcuts. Bob seems to lost audio. I'm not sure what's going on, Bob. Give it a try, maybe a restart. Hopefully, well, honestly, I'm a little lost because I'm not on your end. You could close the browser and re-log in and see if that fixes the audio issue. Jason, you lost audio as well? Oh, no, you're talking to Ken. Okay, so it looks like Bob just lost audio. Bob, give it a try, play around with it, and see if you can get that audio up and running. It sounds like it's something locally on your end. Gotcha, Jason. Okay, so here's the thing. We've pretty much covered the 4 things that we were meant to cover today. Now, I can totally go into more detail. We can talk about different things. Next week's workshop, I'm not sure what the 4 things are in next week's workshop. Next week is Lightroom, not essentials. Let me just look real quick. And it's loading slow, probably because everybody's chatting. Everyday Lightroom is next week. So we're going to deal with folders, collections, virtual copies, develop module basics, more with presets, using watermarks, things like that. So we're just going to extend this. But, you know, we totally have a few more minutes today, and we've made really good time, even though we've had a few technical issues. And we have also got some time left, and I'm totally cool with staying a few minutes later. So what I'll do... I'm not sure how this will work, but everybody that's got audio, I'm going to unmute everybody right now, and we can talk a little bit about things. Bob, I'm hoping you're getting some audio back. You must be logging back in. I'm going to try this. I honestly don't know how well this is going to work, guys, and if there's, like, you know, a vacuum going or something like that, mute your mic or unplug it. But I'm going to unmute everybody in the room here and just see how this works. It may overload everything. We'll give it a try. Here we go. Well, that didn't work. Okay. Okay, now everybody's unmuting. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Gavin.
How's it going? Who's that talking there?
That's Barry.
Hi, Barry.
Am I on too? This is Ken.
Ken, you're right there. I hear you. How you doing, buddy? Let's see here. And if you've got your speakers up really loud, it may cause us some audio feedback, so turn those down or mute the mic on your end. And I can mute everybody again real quickly, but I just wanted to get a little discussion here. And no breaks, you got no mic, that's fine. You can call in if you want to talk, but no worries. Okay, so I think we have everybody on. Now this is feeling a little bit more like we're sitting in a room. Does anybody have anything to discuss or bring up or any questions or thoughts on this, since we got a few more minutes yet? Don't make me pull it out of here.
I might mention.
Go ahead.
I might mention, Gavin, that I was kind of having a little bit of a problem on the underlying logistics, but I think that's just my basic lagging on computer expertise.
In terms of the catalogs and things, Ken?
Well, no, just getting set up to be able to listen to everything you were saying today. I had a problem figuring out how to raise my hand.
In terms of the webinar itself. Gotcha. And to be honest, I'm still learning this system too. You should.
Right, yes.
I'm guessing you're seeing some kind of a panel that's a control panel, and there should be an attendee list in there with a button that allows you to raise your hand. I don't know if you're seeing that or not. Dennis, if you're Dennis, Dennis,
we finally got.
Go ahead, Ken.
No, we're okay right now. We don't need to take up time with that now. We can handle that later.
We'll come to that
I'm really enjoying the seminar.
Dennis, if you're, I know you're in there, Dennis. Would you or Barry take a screenshot of what your interface looks at so I can analyze it later and know better what's going on, and just email it to me?
Yep.
I'd appreciate it. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts? Any questions? Am I clear enough? I just want to make sure everybody got what they came for. Honestly, I'm used to covering way more topics, so that's probably why there's usually more questions. It's kind of nice that we had a small group of things we were discussing today so we could stay focused. Everybody good?
I really feel that it's important. Gavin, I really feel that it's important to review these beginning logistics.
In terms of Lightroom, yeah, I agree. I think the building that foundation is really important, and deciding, how you need to manage your catalogs. I mean, let's talk a little bit about data management. I mean, let's say you got all these catalogs, and this is something that people have a lot of issues with. I mean, photographers all the time, they have issues with how well backed up they are, and all that kind of stuff. The far and away my preference is to have those modular catalogs, because then you can say, okay, here's this one big hard drive. This is where all my jobs go. And then you can say, okay, I use Backblaze or something like that, and I back up that hard drive, or I have an off-site copy of that hard drive. But if you get some order and you get everything pulled in so that you have a system and you always know where things go, you can make a new catalog for a new job. Maybe you even have a template folder for that. It really works well. I guess I'll go ahead and mute everybody. Before I mute everybody, does anybody else have anything to add? You can always raise your hand, but there's no point in having extra noise on there. So, good.
Gavin.
Yes.
Ken Whitmire here. I have a quick question.
Sure.
Since we're dealing with the filing and archiving of images, I wonder how many people are also cutting gold discs and filing them away.
Well, and the question of backup is a good one. We could probably spend all day on it, but I guess I know you use a gold disc, which is supposed to be more of an archival disc. Have you had any experience with them being better in terms of storage?
Because we haven't been around 100 years yet.
It's hard to say. And I can definitely say that I have had regular discs fail in terms of backing up. And here's my thing. I back up everything on hard drives now. One reason is because I just can't fit all the information. Because I do this system where I have this one folder and it has everything from that job, and I'm a little fanatical about backup. I want to be able to have all of that backed up. So I just back it up on hard drives. Every photo I've ever taken digitally essentially is spinning, or that I still have, is spinning on hard drives 24 hours a day in various locations, because I want to know that it's there and it's accessible and it's working. I have had optical discs like DVDs and CDs lose data over time. So I think if you're using the DVD or the CD can as a really important backup to your backup system, it is viable to look into something that's a higher quality so you don't deal with data loss.
Well, I have I'm in complete agreement with the hard drive backups. However, with a 50-year background of filing individual negative files for each client, I like to have something in each client's file. So being able to slip a disk inside of their file is very important to us.
Right.
So that's why we got into the gold disk system.
No, and I hear you there. My issue is more how much they store, and for me, I just have a similar system where I do that on a hard drive. I'm getting a little feedback there, but okay. No, that's good.
That's good.
I'm gonna mute everybody.
I'm gonna mute everybody.
We're getting some feedback. Ken, here, I just muted everybody here except myself. Ken, I totally welcome you to chat more. Just let me know if you want me to put you back on. It's just there's no point in having that feedback there. Okay, I'm just looking at my notes here, making sure, so we've covered the essentials of Lightroom. Let's come back a little bit to what is Lightroom all about, since we've kind of covered the topics. And let's come back in retrospect and look at that. What we have here is a management system and an editing system. And this is what's lacking to me in the old days. Well, it wasn't really that old days. It was a few years ago. But when I just edited with Photoshop, for example, in Bridge, and I would spend so much time. I actually had a workflow mindset in mind even then, but it was just so much harder. I would use Bridge, and then I had a system wherein I had a hotkey in Photoshop, and I could select a folder of images, and I could push a key command in Photoshop. It would close my current image and open the next one in the sequence. So I had like scripts and stuff just so I could open images quickly in Photoshop, because at that time I'd be editing like 100, 150 photos in Photoshop just to correct stupid things like exposure and things like that. Now, yes, we can do that in Bridge now in Camera Raw, and honestly, you can do a lot of, in Bridge, you can do a lot of what you can do in Lightroom in the same way in Adobe Bridge, and you can use these similar workflow concepts in Bridge. Lightroom, I mean, obviously Adobe wants to sell Lightroom. They give it the bonus features. Lightroom's a system from start to finish. Bridge is a management tool, and you do have Camera Raw. You can apply some presets and do some batch corrections. But as we're going to see as we continue to go through this series, Lightroom is a whole system. So next week we're going to talk about developing, working more with metadata and stuff like that in some of these upcoming workshops. And as we go forward, just get into more and more advanced topics in terms of how to manipulate an image, because it's staggering, honestly, what you can do sometimes with these photographs. I mean, let's just look at what different presets will do to an image, just as an example. And we're still staying within the grid module, okay? So let's go, and here's the original. Let's just start applying some different presets. Here is Super Gentle. Okay, it's a fairly light correction. Original, modified, very subtle. The issue with this is it's too blue. So what we really need to do is do something that fixes that. I can go through and you can apply, this warms it up a little bit. Let's try something like Superhero. And it's going to do an auto white balance and auto everything. Again, a little too much, but it's using an auto white balance. Now, we can get into more advanced white balance and stuff with the develop module, but the point is you can have 3 or 4 or 5 presets. It's not best, in my opinion, to try every single preset from the grid module. That's really coming back to what we're going to be doing when we get into develop. The point is you can have 3 or 4 presets that are kind of your standbys. They're your quick correction presets, and it doesn't matter whether you bought them or whether you made them or whether you downloaded them on the internet. Whatever it is you use, know what you have and get a system in place so that you can get these images in here, have a general correction to start with, get those sorted, get your grid edit done. At that point, you can jump into develop mode, and usually, and we'll come to this next week, but usually when I jump into develop mode, I'll then take the 4 stars, because effectively, after this grid edit, and I know I didn't do every single one of these for purposes of time, but after this grid edit, every image looks good. Every image is pretty well ready to go. Now, I want to do more with those. I want them to be polished, especially the better ones. I want them to be really good. But none of these are really bad. So you can jump in at that point and take your 4 or just your 5 stars and do some more serious edits. So I kind of have this sequence I do. I'll do the grid edit on 3s, 4s, and 5s. Then I'll filter down to 4 because I already know the 3s are decent, and those are kind of my filler images anyhow. Then I'll go to 4s and 5s and go through and apply some presets, do some conversions to black and white. Maybe I'll grab a photo here, and I might do it. Honestly, I would probably do it from the develop mode, but I could do something like... let's just put some kind of a monochrome preset on here. So I could do all these conversions, and I could do some of that in the grid mode, but honestly, I would probably wait for that creative stuff to the develop mode, work on the 4s and 5 stars. Then I might take a few of those 5 stars and take those into Photoshop, do some really subtle channel tweaks, maybe play with presets some more, because as we know, in Lightroom, and I don't want to get into the develop module too much, but in the develop module, we can actually mouse over, and up here, we're seeing a preview of what that preset's going to do. So in the develop module, presets save a huge amount of time too, and you want to have a system, you want to have those in place so you know exactly what you're dealing with and you can work efficiently. There's certainly nothing wrong with going over here and tweaking this, and we're going to come to that because it's a really powerful thing, and we're going to talk about that in some of the later workshops. But it's very important, I think, that we get a foundation. Timothy, let's see, downloaded Lightroom shortcuts. Capture. Oh yeah, you know what? I should put that in there. That's I didn't add it because it's kind of a default one, but honestly I should have. The shortcut for rating images is just the number. So I mean, if I want to take this image and I want to rate it 5, I'm going to hit the 5 key, and you'll see I set the rating for 5. Depending on how it's set, it might be a command and then the number, or control. If you go to preferences, you can change some settings like that. Let's see, where's it at? Now that I need it, I'm not finding it. It's probably in, might be in catalog settings too. It might just be defaulted. It used to be that it would do it with command sometimes and you had to change it over. It must just be the default too. Real quick, since we're talking about catalog basics, I went to catalog settings up here in preferences, and if you select this option, automatically write changes to XMP, what that does is it saves out the XMP sidecar file that we've been familiar with in past years, where it's also saving to the Lightroom catalog, like we talked about, but it saves out an XMP sidecar file, which is how Bridge does it. And what that allows is it allows for Bridge to read the adjustments you've made to those photos. And generally, since I'm working with Lightroom the whole time, I just leave that off. But it is an option that's there if you need it. Okay. I think we're good. I mean, I'm happy to talk or take any more questions. But we're technically we're to our time here, and I think we've well covered all the topics for today. I hope I didn't go too fast or too slow. I hope you guys got what you wanted. I'd appreciate some feedback if you have any input. Overall, I think things went pretty smooth. There was a few technical issues, but I think we came off all right. And I really appreciate you guys coming out for this. It's a nice little group for a first time round for this workshop, and I hope you got what you came for. I hope you'll be here next week, and maybe we'll have an even bigger group next week and really keep this growing. I think this could be a really useful way to do things. I'm actually thinking about some other possibilities for workshops in terms of maybe doing specific ones on cloning, on burn and dodge, that kind of stuff, because there's so much we can do. So thank you all for being here. Again,